For those who are listening, this is ERF and Racism Forever Virtual Open Discussion, January 20th. We have our special guest, well, for me, I'm the host, Star Theory. We have a special guest, Stephanie and Chris and Crystal. They were here last time, and tonight we're discussing racism is the nail, and is PTSD is PTSD a symptom of racism? Okay, so Stephanie and Crystal, but I'm gonna turn this to Stephanie. You said something that made me trigger a memory that it is something that is actually existing today. Being from Trinidad, born in Trinidad, when my wife and I went down there before Joshua was born six years ago, when she was pregnant that year, we were leaving to Trinidad. And while we were in the airport waiting to go through customs, there was a huge, we were in this rotunda, and in this rotunda, that entrance to go out to the plane, it showed there was a stone carving of a slave. And from the time you walk in from one wall to the other wall, it shows you the history of how the country of Trinidad was discovered by Christopher Columbus, was named when Christopher Columbus and the Spaniards brought the slaves in, when they brought the Indians from India, and everything until we got our independence. And right at the gate is a big sign that says "Never forget." And so what I'm saying is yes, it should be in the history books. When I came to America, I was shocked, literally shocked, that I knew more about American history than the most people I served with in the military. And I was like, yeah, the Louisiana slave, Louisiana Purchase, you have to learn about that. We have to learn about the Plymouth Rock. All of that I learned in Trinidad. And I even learned about the English history. We had to learn a lot. And so when I came here, it was like, y'all don't know? Y'all don't know this? But the one thing I learned about that I didn't know is how to shut up. It's like if somebody in some race tell you something, you can't talk back. That's what I learned. And so I guess that was the rift I had in me all this time, because I was like, I've never been in a place where I had to, we weren't raised to tone down when someone come to us with that diversity. It was the opposite. My grandparents and parents taught me you had to speak up. You never let anyone talk down to you about your heritage and your culture. That is not how it works. And you need to be you not only to be pleasant, but individual. So I hear you. So before we leave this topic and we go to the next one, what are some little things though? Like for example, if there's one thing I could change in America, one thing for both blacks, whites, and everyone else, is to stop saying the simple words majority and minority everywhere. There is no majority and minority. That's a crime. We're all Americans. So what are a couple of things you could recommend? Oh, I can hear you, Steph.
What would I recommend? Some little things. I can't think of anything. Just becoming aware and accepting it. Like all of this stuff, like what Krista was saying, the insurrection. People didn't say anything. The words that were being used during that moment in time, they weren't saying what was really going on. Right. And then yet and still they look at the civil unrest that happened earlier in the year. And I mean, they beat us up and stereotyped us and, called us so many names. And we are fighting for civil rights and human rights still. It's 2020 and we're still fighting for these same rights. And so I don't have an answer for that, Star Fury. All I know though is that it has to start with educating and being honest and truthful with our children and making sure they understand that these people may never accept them, not in this time, but they don't have to worry about that. They have to keep moving on. And I keep stressing education, education. That is the key.
Okay. Okay. Hey, Crystal?
I just want to re-emphasize, yeah, education is very, very important, but we got to start from young. And just like in Trinidad, because I know my daughter's Trinidadian, so I know, and my baby's daughter's nickname is Bagoon. Bagoon, because Bagoon was a guy who just talked a whole lot. His father talked a whole lot. Nobody can shut him up. And that's how Trinidadians are. They speak from their heart in their music, in their speeches, and they tell the truth. And here we're taught to be careful what we say. You might hurt somebody, but that's suppression. That is American suppression. And that's what they have done to us African Americans here in America. We should zip our mouth. And in the workforce, you can't feed your children if you're going to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Okay? Because no one that's able to hire you, mostly, white people in the workforce, the American corporations, they're not going to keep you in their employ if you speak your mind.
Yeah.
And so we suppress ourselves, we suppress our feelings. And you know what you're talking about? The SP, what is it? The PTSD.
Yeah.
That's what causes PTSD, because we suppress all these feelings and all this stuff that we see going on. And the only way we talk about it, and this is why we have such battles in our families, in our homes, because that's the only place that we can be us. Because if we do it out on the streets, or we do it while we're at work, or we do it while we're even at school. Even at school, I was reading an article the other day about a young man who had who spoke about his feelings, even at an HBCU at Howard. He was expelled from Howard for expressing his feelings about the way some of his co-workers or his colleagues in class should have been hung or got slave mentality. And they expelled him from Howard, would not let him back in because of what he said, which was true, but it didn't matter, because the American way is to suppress your speech. Even though we say we have freedom of speech, the only people here that have freedom of speech is white folks, and we know that. They can say whatever they want, but we can't. We're compromising our family's food. We're compromising our place to live. We're being ostracized and everything else. And just like you said, when you were in Trinidad, you walked up there and it says, never forget. They can't help but try to make us forget, but we can't forget. That's why we're living through this PTSD. When we see someone get killed on the street, it feels like it's our own child. Yeah. We feel that like it's our own children. So it's either we're going to have to break that bondage one brick at a time. We're going to have to work it out, and we're going to have to train our children from the time they're small to know their history, to understand why it exists, and not suppress their speech. Education is you can never learn in an educational environment if you can't speak.
Yeah. And that of oppression.
That is oppression, yes.
Like
we're still oppressed people. Yeah. Very much so. And we need to be able to speak.
You know, and it's, go ahead, Steph, I'm sorry. All right. So, yes, being a communications major, again, you know, I had a professor told me at Howard, a Howard alum, that told me that communicate, if you can't understand what communication is speaking and listening, those are the two pluses, and that equals communication, then you don't belong in the class. You know, he was like, he got to understand how that works. He says, he would always explain, and I would get it, he always explained to me, you're gonna pass the class if you could get up and speak. And he would tell us that if you get up and speak about the news, speak about your current events, speak about what's in the newspaper, on the internet. If you can't get up and do that, you don't belong in communications class, right? And so I agree with you. I remember specifically when I was at Howard, I'd reserve a room. I would clear memories. That's why I can't wait to meet people, you know, later on in life. But I remember at Howard, I'd reserve a room. I was doing a film project and it was mine. I did everything proper. I filed the paperwork. When I got to the room, it was a white professor. He took over the room because he didn't reserve one of the rooms. It was a late class, so he didn't reserve it. And so I went in and said, look, I'm sorry, professor, I reserved this room. And he chastised me and made a joke about me. He said, well, you think he said something like, well, you know, you're a day late and $1 short. And then he said, look at this guy. He's telling the class, look at this guy. He think he, you know, and they were laughing. I said, all right, you know, I'm not. But because I know if at Howard, if you don't do everything by the book, they would, as you can see, they would either expel you, suspend you, and all of that. But again, I wasn't surprised. You know, I went to the assistant dean, and they were like, well, that's the type of professor he is, and that's what I was told. I was like, okay. And this is, and you see, this is, before we move on real quickly, this is the key to the organization. This is why people are afraid, totally afraid when they see it. And when I mean afraid, I mean they support it, but as far as stepping up to come talk, they're like, they still have that in it. And it's not just blacks, it's also whites. It's on both sides. And so as the private person I am, I'm here to break down hopefully that final door so we can have kids to say, okay, how can we meet on that open grass to communicate with each other?